For now, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the director of the Demos think tank, Polly Mackenzie, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Boateng. They will be with us from now until just before midnight. Let's start with a look at what's on some of those front pages. The Mirror, first of all, carnage, and that is its headline. It says Storm Eunice has left 150,000 homes without power. The Times calls it a day of destruction, and it focuses on pressure on energy companies to restore power to hundreds of thousands of homes. The Telegraph, meanwhile, pictures the O2 Arena after its roof was shredded by the storm. It adds that wind speeds were the highest ever recorded in England. That is also the lead for The Guardian, which focuses on the 4 people killed during today's storm. The Express also has that picture and says the clear-up bill will amount to around £500 million. The Daily Star also leading on the wrath of Storm Eunice, which it calls a 122-mile-an-hour killer. Meanwhile, the FT focuses on the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. It splashes on Vladimir Putin's decision to bring forward nuclear drills as tensions with Kiev escalate. And a different story for the Daily Mail, which has comments about the head of MI5, about the threat posed to Britain by hostile powers like Russia and China, which are accused of targeting MPs. And a reminder to you that by scanning the QR code that you'll be seeing on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you are watching us. Well, let's introduce our guests. We're joined tonight by Director of Demos think tank, Polly Mackenzie, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Boateng. Let's get right into it. Thank you very much to both of you for being here with us on a Friday night. Let's start with the Mirror and its front page there, which we actually just showed previously. One of the stronger headlines, carnage. So Eunice batters Britain. Anita, would you agree with that assessment? Carnage.
I mean, it's felt and definitely taken quite a lot of people by surprise wherever they were in the country. And certainly, you know, they have the headline figures there from the Mirror: 3 dead, 150,000 homes potentially with no power, £500 million cleanup. I mean, I'm a councillor in London, and I've been shocked at the number of trees, for instance, that have come down. And I think we're almost lucky that more people haven't lost their lives.
Absolutely. I wonder, given that we were warned, it feels as though, Polly, we have come a long way from 1987 and the storm that people underestimated. Well, the meteorologists underestimated as well. This morning, I think there were many of us waiting in expectation, perhaps thinking, is this it? And then, of course, this afternoon, it struck. For you, I mean, these images are incredible, but do you think that, how have you sort of, I guess, assessed the way that this storm has been trailed and handled and sort of, well, foreseen, predicted?
I think, you know, both the meteorologists and then lots of public service providers have, in large part, handled themselves very well. I was impressed by some of the train cancellations, for example, just giving as much information as they could, sharing pictures so that people could understand what was happening, updating their advice, being clear, actually, with people so that we could take those steps to keep ourselves safe, to, you know, tie down things in the garden, whatever that might be, keep away from those trees. I mean, you know, there's a tree down in my local park. Anita's talked about the ones near her. I don't remember seeing trees felled like that. Actually, since 1987, there was a big tree came down in our school playground, and that was it was there for weeks, or at least to my childhood memory, I think it was there for weeks on end. And I think that is really important that we have been able to respond in that way. But it does remind us that, you know, there's not much you can do in the face of the weather. It's frustrating, it's expensive, and can just devastate all sorts of plans. 150,000 homes without power. My dad actually is one of them in rural Wales. He'll be out without power for another 24 hours. And, especially for vulnerable people, that can be absolutely overwhelming. If you're reliant on medicines that you need to keep in your fridge, for example, or electrical equipment for people with disabilities. So I really hope that the power companies in particular are getting support to those vulnerable people over the next 24 hours.
And we will come back to those people without power at the moment. But first, I want to bring in the Times, who have a double spread on Storm Eunice with some absolutely incredible pictures of the damage caused by the storm. They lead with 3 dead. Obviously, this went to print before we knew about the 4th person who had been killed by the storm in the UK. But some incredible pictures there of obviously the damage done to transportation, to the church spire there, and those waves crashing. Anita, do you think enough was done on the transport side of things? Obviously, the trains have been most affected, but then we've seen those incredible images of lorries, a lorry falling over on the road again. It was something that was supposed not to be happening this time around because it had happened in previous storms. Do you think the transport, those in charge of transport, got it right this time round?
I actually think the messaging has been very clear, and I suspect that one of the reasons why we haven't seen as many fatalities and serious incidents is because a lot of people just stayed at home and decided to avoid kind of quote unquote avoidable travel. I think I'm sure the Mirror had a bit of this story about Jet TV and the coverage of, for instance, planes that had particularly difficulty landing at Heathrow for various boring and complicated reasons, but essentially there were huge planes that had to land at Heathrow, and we had this incredible scenes today of an amateur airline enthusiast, filming attempts from various different twin-sized jet engine, huge planes attempting to land. But generally, I think if you look across the transport system, it hasn't fallen over. Lots of instruction was very clear to sort of stay at home, so a lot of cars weren't on the road. And when it comes to trains, lots of trains, I think, were sensibly cancelled.
I think if there was any silver lining to this storm, it was certainly seeing those planes and the amazing suddenly going viral of the host of that jet programme or that jet channel. Let's bring in the Express here with its front page, which shows the O2, the Millennium Dome, battered by killer storm, and you can see the extent of the damage there on the O2. And in fact, our very own Jonathan Samuels was presenting from there this afternoon. We could really see the extent of the damage on that building. Polly, if we go back to those without power, because interestingly, there have been different numbers in different publications on how many are without power. And that is, at the end of the day, that is one of the things that is going to be scrutinised the most once we come out of this storm, because we've been here before and there was an idea that this wouldn't happen a second time round. And now people are not only without power, but being told that the restoration of their power may actually be delayed more.
We saw just a few weeks ago in the northeast people being stuck without power for days and days on end. And I hope, certainly at the time, the power networks and the suppliers were talking about learning the lessons from that kind of lengthy interruption for this. As I say, you can't stop bad weather from happening, but what you can do is have good backup systems and good response systems. You need to think about, do you know where your vulnerable customers are? Because it may be that the retail energy companies know, but the power networks, the people actually putting the lines in place, don't particularly know. We have good ways of getting water to people in emergencies. What are the ways that we get power to people in emergencies? What are the backup sources of help? How do you get people to other houses, family members, for example, who do have power? There's a lot of emergency support that needs to be done in these circumstances until you can get the power back on. And I really hope that lessons have been learned from quite recent experience. But I think the reality is we need to invest more in that response, disaster management, because our expectation has to be that extreme weather events are going to get more and not less likely.
Back into the papers, this time on the subject of the Ukraine crisis, which we've been talking about a lot, obviously, over the course of the evening. Let's start with the Financial Times. The headline there, Putin blames Kiev for escalation and brings forward nuclear drills. I wonder, Anita, given that Joe Biden just came out saying in his press conference, came out saying he was convinced that Putin does intend to invade Ukraine, do you think we are on the brink of an invasion of Ukraine? And what repercussions does that have for NATO allies, but for the UK particularly?
I mean, the thing that, Stephanie, you've been flagged today is this risk of a false flag incident. So basically something that might have, be instigated or orchestrated by Russia in order to provide a pretext for action. I think it's clear that this is becoming incredibly serious. And I think the risk of actual conflict is increasing day by day. And I think fundamentally, what does Putin want? He wants division in Europe. And I think that's why we're seeing across the papers today that warning from Boris Johnson for unity in Europe. And that, I think, is the major thing that's at risk if Russia does decide to act, notwithstanding the fact that a sovereign democratic nation would, in that instance, be invaded in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, talking about that headline, that's the Telegraph. PM calls for unity over heavy sanctions on Russia if it invades. Polly, do you think it's too little too late? Has the West not been united enough, quickly enough?
I don't think it's ever too late. But the reality is that faced by Russian aggression in Ukraine before, when they took over, annexed Crimea, when Russians played such a devastating part in the war in Syria, including potentially in chemical attacks, the West sort of basically shrugged its shoulders and have reinforced the view of President Putin that in the end, democracies are a weak form of government that's not capable of standing up to his great ambition, which is to return the Eastern Bloc to Russian dominance and Russian control, ideally, to create that greater Russia. He comes up with pretexts. We shouldn't believe any of his propaganda.
OK. Polly, I'm going to have to cut you off because we do have, I'm so sorry, we do have to try and get to the weather because it is obviously an important weather. Thank you very much, Polly and Anita. We will be back with them shortly.